warm welcome to this two-part video on applying for clinical psychology training. I'm David Murphy and I've been involved in clinical psychology training in one form or another for about the last 30 years, both as a clinical supervisor and also as a member of core staff and the director of the Oxford Clinical Psychology Programme. I've also been the director of the Division of Clinical Psychology Professional Standards Unit and chair of the clearinghouse for clinical psychology training. However, for this video I was really keen not just to focus on my own perspectives, but to involve people who've got recent experience of going through the process or have recently been through it themselves. And so I was really pleased that I was joined in making this video by 5 fantastic early career psychologists. And I really hope that you'll find the content of these 2 videos to be useful if you're thinking of applying yourself. Before we start talking about the process of applying, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge that applying for clinical psychology training can be a stressful experience. And that's not surprising when we think about what's involved. Firstly, we know there's a limited probability of success. Each year, on average, approximately 1 in 6 of the people who apply for clinical psychology training are accepted. Also, it's a prolonged process. The applications open in September and the process goes on through until sort of May, June, when places are allocated. It's also high stakes. People can feel like their lives are on hold and not able to make sort of major life decisions while the process is ongoing. And almost inevitably, because of the numbers that are involved, there's a limited opportunity to get feedback, particularly at the application form stage. So you can go through the process of applying and not really knowing what you could have done differently. And finally, there's a low sense of control. It's a sense that you're putting yourself into other people's hands to make these decisions, and all you've got is a limited number of characters on the form. So I think, despite, courses do a lot to try and reduce the stress of the experience, but I think inevitably, because of these characteristics, it is a stressful experience. I think it's important to recognise that. And another thing is that people from minority and marginalised groups have an additional layer of stress on top of all of this, and that's a sense that's prevalent and supported by quite a lot of kind of aspects of training, that clinical psychology is geared to white middle class people with no physical and mental health difficulties. One way of managing the stress of the application process is to reach out for sources of support. And there's a number of really effective and helpful sources of support. One is the DCP Prequalification Group, who publish the Alternative Handbook and run support events, and also the DCP Minorities Group. Individual courses run information events which can be helpful, and also some courses run mentoring programs for people from particular backgrounds, so it's certainly worth looking out for those. But also there's support that you can access from other people who are applying in the process, and that can be through local assistant psychologists, psychology graduate groups, and also just from people that you've met who are also going through the process. There can be people that you meet through online forums or through events that you attend, and they can be a really helpful source of support in the process. When we talk about applying for clinical psychology training, often people want to know what the secret formula is. There's an idea that there's some form of words that if you put them in exactly the right order, that is the key to unlocking being successful in your application for clinical psychology training. So I thought before we start, we might sort of just get this over with, in case you're waiting the whole video to find out what the secret is. And the secret really is that there is no formula. I've read thousands of forms over the years, and the ones that are successful look very different from one another. Honestly, there is no secret formula. I think one thing that I would say, that if there is a secret formula, this is what it is. And I used to put this up in the waiting areas when we were interviewing candidates at Oxford for training, is this quote from Oscar Wilde: "Be yourself, because everyone else is already taken." And I think trying to discover, some sort of secret formula, or think that there's something out there that's going to be the key is not the answer. I think the answer is really to be able to know what your own strengths and values and what you bring to clinical training really is, and be confident in knowing what you're going to bring, and expressing that through the form. So I think before we move on to the discussion, it might be helpful just to think about what actually makes a successful application form, and what really the process is about. And it's not about ticking boxes about all the things you've done. What the course team are trying to do is to look at you and project what, how, sort of make a projection about how you're going to manage the process of training, and how through that what kind of clinical psychologist you'll be at the end of this process. And so a successful form communicates what you would bring to that process, and it's a developmental process. It's not, they're not expecting you to be the finished product, but what will you bring to the process of clinical psychology training, and then sort of through that, how you might develop as a clinical psychologist at the end of it. There's going to be lots of points through the whole process of applying where you might start experiencing doubts about whether this was the right path to take. And what I would say is, and we'll talk more about this in the video, if at first you don't succeed, you're normal. So if we look at the figures, we can see that only a minority of people were successful on their first application. So less than a third of people were successful on the first time they applied. And even only just slightly over half of people were successful on their first or second attempts. And a significant proportion of people applied 3, 4, and a small proportion of people were successful on their 5th or 6th attempt. So I think what's important is not to have unrealistic expectations that if you're not successful first time, it means this isn't for you. There certainly comes a time when you need to weigh up the pros and cons of continuing to apply, and we will talk about that in the video. But I think it's important to recognize that not being successful first time is the norm. That's more than enough of an introduction from me. Let's move now on to the video, which is a discussion around a number of questions that were supplied in a poll that I ran on Twitter, covering a whole range of aspects of applying for clinical psychology training. And you can see in the comments below the video, there's a list of the questions if you want to jump to specific ones. I really hope you'll find it useful. I'm pretty sure you will. So should we do the introductions? Who wants to start? Alice, do you want to start?
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So my name's Alice McNamara. I'm an assistant psychologist currently working in the Southwest. I've applied to clinical a couple of times now. So I'm a pre-training person. And
I think am I right in saying that you're past chair of the pre-qual?
Yeah. So until about last year, I was the co-chair of the Prequalification Group. So I did that for about 3 years.
Well, thanks for joining us, Alice. James.
Hi there. So I'm James Pamment. I'm a just starting, so a third year. So starting 2 weeks' time, my third year. So I'm a trainee clinical psychologist at ECL. Currently finishing up a placement at Great Ormond Street Hospital.
Great, thanks, James. Neelam.
Hi, I'm Neelam Laxhman. I currently work as a research assistant with the East London Foundation Trust, and this will be my 4th year applying.
Great, thanks, Neelam. Farhana.
Hello, so my name is Farhana Maleque. I am a trainee psychological wellbeing practitioner, soon to be qualified this month, hopefully. And this is my 4th year applying too.
Great, thanks, Farhana. But it's not your first video, because Farhana, I don't want to embarrass her, but so Farhana is one of the stars of the video we did last year on interviews. Sorry, I'm embarrassed. And last but not least, Jocelyn.
So hi everyone, my name is Jocelyn, and I've just completed my undergraduate in BSc Psychology, and now I'm about to start my MSc in Counselling at Bangor University.
Brilliant, thanks, Jocelyn.
Aspiring clinical psychologist as well.
Excellent. And sorry, I should have said last, and definitely least is me. So I'm David Murphy. I've been involved in applying for clinical psychology in one way or another for just over 30 years now. So I applied and then trained in clinical psychology at the Institute of Psychiatry course in London just over 30 years ago. And then I've been involved in interviews for quite a number of years at UCL as a supervisor, and also sort of supporting people applying for training who were working in my department, and also on the other side, in the training side, as a program director of the Oxford course, and also I've been the chair of the Clearinghouse Management Board in the past. So between us, I think we've got a really good team. We should say, unfortunately, Kat Alcock was going to join us, but unfortunately her daughter's been sick today, so she's not able to join us. But hopefully we're going to get some clips of Kat to put into this video. But I think we've got a great team to talk about some of the issues, and we've got a list of questions that people put into a poll that I did on Twitter, and that the panel sort of came up with as well, which I think cover most of the key sort of things that come up. So I think between us, we're going to just try and work our way through that. So now we're going to move on to some of the questions that you've put in. And some of the questions we had actually that you generated were about the fairness of the course. And so we before we get on to the specifics of the process, we just wanted to talk about that for a minute, and Farhana's going to say something about that.
Yeah, so we had a question in, David. So when will the inequality of extra points given to people on some courses for having a master's be addressed? It's incredibly disheartening when you cannot afford this advantage when others can.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, I think that people might know I've done quite a bit of work to try and sort of focus on the inequities in the current system, and there's a number of aspects of the current system around the things that we take into consideration that are affected by people's advantage, particularly in relation to masters, voluntary experience and things like that. And I think we're becoming increasingly aware that those present barriers to people, and they're certainly significant factors in contributing to the challenges or lack of diversity in the profession. So I'm pleased that eventually, you know, I think that these things are starting to change. I think it's been far too long that these things have been addressed, but certainly I'm really encouraged at the moment that Health Education England are really taking an interest in this, and particularly Adrian Whittington, who's the lead for psychological professions in Health Education England, has held a workshop over the summer this year, and has come up with an action plan that for all the stakeholders to take action on this. And I think some courses will see actually build that into their sort of process this year for the 2021 intake, and certainly from next year for the year after. I think people will be building, particularly looking at contextual factors, to try and make the system more a fairer system, really.
So on to the next series of questions. A few have asked under the topic of, am I ready to apply this year? And the first question that came through was, most courses ask for a minimum of a mid 2-1. If someone achieved a lower 2-1, should they still apply? I don't know if anyone has anything on that.
I'll have a go at starting this off, and other people might want to come in. I think the thing to say, I mean, I think that the wider thing is that obviously applying for clinical psychology is very competitive. So I think that's probably, you do need to bear that in mind. And it's so on average, of every 6 people that apply, 1 person is accepted each year. So that's, you know, so these things do get taken into account. Now, I think, and another thing I think I would say about this is that there is some variation within courses. Now, all courses look at academic sort of ability, and that's sort of assessed on the basis of performance at undergraduate, amongst other things. So all courses will take that into account to some extent, but there is some variability. So it's definitely worth checking the individual courses. So if a course says, you know, we won't accept anyone below a mid 2-1, then you do need to really, you know, be sure about whether to apply for that if you have got a low 2-1. Some courses say that they'll take into account other things, like if you've got another qualification, they'll take that into account. But other courses don't specify that, or don't look at academic ability in that way. So some courses that put more emphasis on pre-admission testing won't look at your academic transcript in that sort of detail. So I think it's worth looking at the individual courses to see what they say about that.
Thank you, David. And another question that bounces off that is, can you apply whilst currently studying for a master's, and will this affect the decision making?
Let me just, I think that's fairly brief. I mean, you certainly can apply, because you're the one thing you have to have is your graduate basis for chartership, which is your undergraduate or your conversion. So you need to have that in order to apply, but a master's is an extra, so you can certainly apply while you're still doing a master's, and a lot of people do. I mean, that's a very frequent thing to do. Obviously what they won't have is your outcome of your master's, but it's certainly, you know, it shouldn't stop you applying. You know, it certainly, yeah, it shouldn't put you off applying, I would say. I don't know if anyone else has got a view on that.
Only that I suppose also not having a master's also shouldn't put you off as well. I don't know if that's, sorry if I'm jumping ahead to another question, but something else to keep in mind.
No, I think that's right. I mean, it's, I think, you know, I tend to go on a sort of rant about masters, so I'm trying to sort of restrain myself a bit. I think it can be helpful. I think I wouldn't, you know, I think masters are pushed by some, obviously universities sometimes push masters as the way, you know, way to really kind of get into clinical. And I don't think it is. I mean, I think for some people it can be helpful. And, you know, every year people are sort of deciding whether to do a master's or not. I think it can give you additional opportunities to do research and so on. But, you know, I think it's not, I mean, each year, I think if you look at the figures, about roughly half of people have masters, but actually a lot of people who don't get on also have masters. So I certainly don't think it's a sort of, you know, ticket to get in. I think you know, it's in itself, it's not going to, you know, be the deciding factor. It's whether that helps you to demonstrate and develop your research competencies, to develop your understanding. So I think it's how it fits into your own development. And it's certainly, you know, as I say, I think it's at least half of people don't have a master's who get onto clinical training courses. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in.
It also feeds into that equality we were talking about earlier, in the sense of not many, but people can't always afford a master's. And I know certainly that's a decision I have to make, whether I went straight into getting clinical experience and AP posts. So yeah, I hear, I think it's valuable. And if you do a master's and it's definitely kind of increasing your clinical experience and improves your application, then great. But also not having a master's isn't the end of the world, and actually, you know, the route's still there.
I just also wanted to add as well, instead of doing a master's, you can go for the PWP training, which again is like a PG dip, and you do some like academic work as well. So that's another path that you can take. But as you said, David, doing a master's can give you that additional research skills, and can help you prepare for the doctorate. So if you can afford it, and you want to do more research related, academic related things, then pursue it. And yeah,
I think I mean we're mainly focusing on the form, but since we're talking about it, my usual advice is to say don't do a master's just for the sake of doing a master's. Do a master's because you want to do the course, you think it's going to be interesting, you're actually going to get something out of doing it. Would be my advice. Okay.
Great. And sorry, even just to add on that, I was about to reiterate on that message because I just finished graduating in a BSc in psychology, and I remember people just saying, oh, like, okay, if you want to be a clinician, you have to do a clinical and health masters, but something about that didn't click right within me, because at the end of the day, why spend loads of money and loads of your time into something that you're not invested in mentally? So that's why I've gone the route of choosing counselling, where it's all transferable skills. But yeah, I agree with that idea of like, honestly, don't feel coerced to do a master's, because at the end of the day, which was a huge misconception that I had myself, that you had to, when you really don't. There's so many different routes to get onto the decline side, I've been told.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, Jocelyn. And then we might come back to that a bit later when we talk about having a plan B, because I think what you're saying is it's, you know, you're thinking about skills that you can apply, you know, ideally maybe in clinical, but maybe in another setting if not. So I think that's a really important point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then the next question is kind of bounces off, but is it worth applying if I have graduated this year?
I think, do you want to read or combine all of those questions? Because there are a few questions about how much experience you should have, Jocelyn.
Okay, so again, the questions that follow after that is, what type of clinical and research experience are courses looking for? And should I still apply if I have not had regular clinical supervision? And then the last one to conclude the series of am I ready to apply this year is it worth applying to have practice one? So I know that's a lot.
I think those questions were all about, you know, how much clinical experience do I need, and so that does kind of tie into that. Is it worth applying if I have graduated this year? And again, I think it's worth saying that it's worth checking the criteria for the course, because some courses do say you need a year's postgraduate experience, and some courses don't say that. Some courses explicitly say that they don't require that, although realistically, if you look at you know, and the data that comes out from the alternative handbook, I think says that, doesn't it? How much experience do people have? Most people have post-qualification experience, postgraduate experience. Again, if you've done an undergraduate course that has a year built into it, then you've already got some experience, although I think some courses may not count that. So it's definitely worth checking that. But I think if you have got sufficient experience to be able to meet their criteria, then it's definitely worth applying. I'll maybe answer that one about practice run. I don't think it's worth just doing it as a sort of practice exercise. I think you want to you know, actually sort of do it properly or not do it at all, really. But there's no, I mean, I think there's no harm in applying if you feel like that, you know, you stand you know, it is possible. I don't know if other people have views on that.
So another question that has been asked by someone under the am I ready to apply this year is the question of, can I apply even if I have not had an assistant psychology role, as well as not having clinical supervision?
So I suppose.
And
Sorry.
that could be answered. Then after that, it's just a question of what type of clinical and research experience our course is looking for. So what counts as clinical experience? We can answer the first one.
So I suppose my route was quite conventional in some ways. I did have an AP position. I did have a research assistant position as well. But I think, like David said before, my cohort's massive. And I know from my fellow trainees and my colleagues that their experiences vary so much. My pre-training experiences vary so much. And lots of people weren't APs. Lots of people were PWPs, carers. You know, it's a real range of experience that counts as clinical. So definitely don't just think kind of AP is the only thing, and then they're kind of privileged, because it doesn't seem that way from the makeup of my course.
And I guess lots of people in different professions are demonstrating skills that are also fit with what clinical psychologists do, different aspects of it. So it's just thinking about that. If you're doing interventions and you're supervised by a PWP, that's still really relevant. So it's just thinking of the different skills that you're just trying to demonstrate and what other professions have those and how you're using them, because as a support worker you use lots of different skills that will completely fit with clinical experience and would be really, really relevant for the application. I think it's easy to, just as like everyone else has said, it's easy to get caught up in thinking you have to be an AP, you have to be a research assistant, but I really don't think you do. And sometimes you can be an assistant psychologist and not get any good experience anyway. That happens to lots and lots of people, because unfortunately the title is banded around and sometimes just covering on what's basically an admin job. My research assistant job, I was folding for 8 hours a day. So I got much more out of my PWP role, which wasn't the sort of generic thing, than I did out of my research assistant job. So I think it's also just thinking about what you're actually doing in the role.
Really good point.
Would anyone else like to add on to that? Or maybe comment about not having clinical supervision as well?
I think not having clinical supervision can be a challenge, but again, I don't think it should stop you applying. I mean, if you're doing a job where you're not being supervised by a clinical psychologist, then the kind of sort of discussions or whether, you know, how much supervision you have might vary. So I think you might want to try and supplement that somehow. Now that can be either, you know, trying to get, you know, negotiate some supervision elsewhere, or even just, you know, attending an AP group or a, you know, graduate psychologist group to kind of be thinking about that process of applying psychological knowledge to what you're doing. But I certainly don't think that should stop you applying. Again, it ties back to what we were saying earlier about the clinical reference. Again, you'd be particular issues around making sure that you think through that clinical reference issue. But yeah, no, I don't think that should be, it should stop you applying.
Again, like what I was saying with how AP jobs cannot be all they're sort of made up to be. Same with sometimes clinical supervisors aren't that good, even if they are psychologists. So there's lots you could be learned from peers and from other people as well. So it's important to remember that too, because it isn't just all about having that title as your supervisor. You can learn so much more from lots of different colleagues as well as clinical psychologists.
I think that's so true, Alice, and actually, yeah, no, I think in a way we're kind of illustrating that in this video here, because, you know, although I've got more experience of this than you've all got actually different perspectives, and so, you know, you can learn so much from other people. It's really important not to just be too stuck. I guess that's a theme that goes through a lot of this, just not being too stuck in terms of thinking about what you have to do, it's about, you know, what you can get out of it. And I think talking to other people, getting your development can come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes, and it's really important to be open. Also,
there isn't a need to rush. So we don't have to feel compelled to apply as soon as we get out of uni, or apply as soon as we meet the minimum criteria, because all the experience gained before you get onto training isn't wasted. It means so much when you're on training as well. is my hope. I'm not on training, but the hope is that all the skills that you've gained beforehand are just as relevant and may make that process easier. So I just think we shouldn't feel compelled to rush our way into things and rush our way into the course.
I think that's a really, really important point, Alison. It just reminds me, I did something with some trainees when I was in Oxford, who were on the course, and they said exactly the same thing. I remember them saying, actually, if we had got on immediately after graduation, we wouldn't have got as much out of the course because we wouldn't be approaching it in the same way. So I think that's a really important point.
So that concludes the series of questions for Am I Ready to Apply this year? And I guess from what everyone said, the question 2, is it worth applying if I have graduated this year? Everyone's pretty much answered that.
Okay. Great. Should we let's move on to the next question. Alice, you're going to take the lead on that.
So the next section we're just going to think about is, should I keep going? So the process can be really long, and there are multiple people that have probably applied maybe a few times. I myself have applied 3 times, so this will be my 4th time. And each time you that are then applying again, it does prompt sort of seeds of doubt of, should I be doing this? Am I wasting my time? And that fear of, am I going to make it? Am I going to be okay? Will I ever get on? So a question that was proposed from the Twitter question that we did was, is it worth applying after I've applied for so many years? And just how to cope with that sense of doubt that you may have if you have applied a few times. Don't know if anyone has anything to say on that.
Yeah, I suppose speaking from as someone who went through that process, I applied 3 times. Yeah, it is really tough. I think recognizing that it is hard to kind of have the rejection and have all the stress and the reinvigorate yourself each year for it. And I suppose what I noticed myself was that each year I was getting more interviews and going further each time, and I did feel like it was progress. But I think also kind of what you're speaking to earlier, Alice, about how the experience that you get whilst you're applying for a course is actually really valuable. You know, I had 2 very good years as an assistant psychologist, learning a lot, and then a year as a clinical research facilitator, and that's helped me immensely on the course. So it's really, I think, if I could kind of speak to myself previously to kind of the person that was applying, I very much emphasize that point. It's not wasted time, and to try and be kind of compassionate and just keep, I knew what I wanted to do, and it's hard to get there, and I'm not qualified yet, but I'm on the course. But yeah, I definitely think if that, as long as that person still feels that they want to do it, I think it's, I kind of strongly encourage them, and I know they can do it because they obviously got a lot of determination and resilience to keep on applying.
I think I wanted to add something as well in relation to that question. So I applied 3 times. This is my 4th year applying, and I didn't get any interviews in the first year. The second year I had an interview and I got a reserved place, but didn't get the place. And then this year I didn't get any interviews at all. And that was quite disheartening as well, because it felt like I wasn't making any progress. And I thought this was the year that I was going to actually leave the profession. But after reflecting and going through the stages of, I hate this, I don't want to do this anymore, I realized that there aren't enough people from my background or BAME backgrounds. And I've spoken to some of my colleagues, my friends, who really encouraged me to keep going. And after thinking about it for a while and reflecting on if I can survive in this field any longer, I decided, let me try again this year and still enjoy the journey. So don't stop my life. Don't put it on hold just for this profession. Do the things that you want to do. Be strategic about your next steps, because that will have a knock-on effect in terms of my decisions or what I take on later on. So I think I've learned to just enjoy the ride rather than working so hard for the end goal. And, you know, it is a really competitive field. So it's about broadening your networks, using your networks really wisely, asking them, what can I do to improve? Addressing your strengths and weaknesses. What can you do to kind of strengthen your weaknesses, or things that you need to improve on, and then go from there. But yeah, this year I was going to quit. Luckily I haven't, so I'm gonna try again this year, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I can get an interview at least. So yeah, don't give up. We need you in the field, I believe. And you know, there's this determination that, you know, you wouldn't have entered the field if you didn't have that determination, or if you didn't want to support the field or support those that are struggling with mental health difficulties. So, you know, that value needs to be reignited. And sometimes when we get that rejection, it may feel like, oh, there's no point. But yeah, we can go into plan Bs in a short while as well, because there is always a plan B. So yeah.
I think it's a really good point to what you said. Oh, sorry, David.
Go on.
A really good point to what you said there, and also remembering it isn't actually the end goal, because there'll be another goal after this goal, and trying to keep that perspective. I think we all need a bit of re-inspiration, especially after you get rejected, but whether it be from an AP post interview or from clinical. So trying to remind yourself that it's part of the process. Something that I tried to keep in mind this year is that the result of my interview, the fact that I did not get in, didn't actually change anything. It didn't change the skills I have or the knowledge I have. It was just an answer from the university who don't actually know me that well. So I tried to keep in mind that I know I can still do it. And that's really hard. And I have that positive time. And then I also have 1,000 other times where I think, oh no, I can't do it. But I think it's really important for us to remember that it is a bit of a ride, it is a bit of a journey, and that we'll have those low points. But once we get re-inspired, we'll be okay as well. To keep going, not make rash decisions in the realms of rejection. Thank you.
So should we move on to the next one, which is about where to apply? Jocelyn, do you want to?
Yeah, so we've had 2 questions for that. One being, how should I decide which courses to apply for? And I guess the other one ties into it, where it states, how do I know what courses fit with my values? Does anyone have anything to say on that?
I'll just say something really brief to get it started, and I think other people will, because I know other people have got more recent experience looking at different courses than I have. I do think this is a really, really important question, and I'm really pleased that people did flag this up, because I think actually it's something that people don't think enough about, because although the training itself, there are a lot of similarities, the courses do differ in certain respects. You know, the most obvious is the size of, geographically where they are in the country, and also where the placements are, so where the course is and then where the placements are. So some courses, you know, in a very busy sort of what's the word, sort of condensed sort of area like London, the placements are going to be geographically relatively close to the course centre, whereas in other parts of the country the placements are much more spread out, which, you know, you may prefer one or the other, but it's a difference. And the cohort size as well. So James's course, UCL, what's the cohort size at UCL now? It's about 50 going to be this year, is it?
So it's 52 in our class. I think the next year is going to be 63 or 64.
Wow. So that's the extreme end. Whereas other courses like Bangor, I think, is one of the smallest. Coventry is one of the smallest. They were 10 before the increase, so they'll be like 40, whatever it'll be now. It's less than 15. So that's a big difference. And again, there's pros and cons to that. So courses do vary, and they, to some extent, in terms of orientation as well. So I would say it's definitely worth finding out about courses in terms of the different aspects of them and which one fit with you best. So I know people on the panel have got experience of that, so perhaps you want to come in.
Something I found really helpful is the alternative handbook, also just to plug it because it's very, very useful in terms of finding out which courses I felt fit with my values. Also, a couple of years ago, when I was starting to think more about where I was going to apply, I did try to really think about what my values and what my strengths were and try to flip it on its head a little bit in terms of where do I actually want to go, not where will anyone take me. It's having that little switch, because I think initially when you're starting out, you just want to go anywhere where they'll take you, but you have got to think about your life, how you're going to cope, how you're going to do the course. If you're someone who wants to be near your family or your home, then you've got to think about that as well. And I think it's really important for those things to come into consideration, and to think about your values and your strengths and what course would actually suit you best. And the alternative handbook I definitely found really helpful for that, and just some questions on working out my own values. So I found that really useful.
Yeah, I had no idea about the alternative handbook. I don't know where that one's kind of slipped past me. Clearinghouse site. I did the similar thing. I looked at. I think actually for me it's modalities in terms of what they like, therapeutic modalities that kind of interest me the most. Was one of the things I looked out for, but also speaking to supervisors and speaking to. So I worked somewhere with current trainees as well, and having a sense of what they thought as well. I thought was a really good indicator of what they thought of the course. So that definitely influenced my choices, because my choices throughout the 3 years definitely switched around a bit. Yeah.
I also sort of think about my weaknesses and my strengths as well, and what I enjoy personally. So before, the first time I applied for universities that were in London because they were a bit closer to me, and I thought that would be more convenient. But as years have gone by, I've really thought about, well, what are my strengths and what do I enjoy? So one of the things that I really enjoy, for example, is like research and conducting research in mental health. So I look specifically for universities that are perhaps emphasize more like academia and research components as well.
Sometimes you can get hold of as well the different courses handbooks and look at those, and you can really get a feel for their values. I found that I'm applying to Plymouth this year as well, and I got an interview there last year, and I found the handbook really helped me in thinking about their values and what the course was like and how that fitted with me.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the alternative handbook that you mentioned is really, really helpful, because it gives the comments from trainees, and I have to say, I think the alternative handbook is absolutely brilliant. It's so useful. It's not the easiest document to kind of get information out, because it's just a lot of raw data, but it's so valuable because there are lots of comments from trainees, and you can get a sense of the different differences between courses. What I would say is that often people focus a lot on the teaching and the sort of, you know, the course orientation, and actually, as you'll know, James, that actually the teaching is only one part of the course, and it's actually, you know, 50% of your time is actually spent on placement. So I think it's worth thinking about all three of the key aspects of the course. So teaching, placements and research, and just thinking about you getting a sense of the experience of each of those, really. And also, I guess, to some extent, the university itself. But I mean, again, that's only going to be relevant for the teaching and the research part, but you know, it's helpful to think about, you know, some courses do give you an idea of where the placements are and what kind of options there are around.
I think that's a really good point, actually, and something I hadn't fully considered, and was quite fortunate with where I'm at in London. It's because I think even so, as you go through the years, your teaching drops. So in the third year, I think we're in 1 day a fortnight. So but the rest of the time you're in placement, you have 1 day study day as well. So you know, your clinical experience and your placements and what they might offer is it's a really important thing to think about. Yeah, for sure.
I think I also wanted to add just quickly is the courses and how they, if they have like any assessments or exams. So play by your strength. If your strength is in MCQs or situational judgment tests, I wouldn't recommend applying to those courses, because that might take away some of your options. So if you prefer not having those assessments to get you through the door, try and look for another course that fits your values. So like Neelam, I was applying to most of London courses. Now I'm considering going outside London, and that has pros and cons. But I've decided that, you know, in order for me to increase my chances, it's probably better to apply outside London and apply strategically. So to courses that are probably not assessing me based on these exams.
With that as well, I think not fearing the idea of the tests and the assessments is because sometimes there are different assessments at different universities, and I always just thought, no, can't go anywhere near tests, unis don't want to. And then David did point out to me that it might actually be quite helpful for me to apply to a couple of them because I don't have a master's or probably don't look amazing academically. And then I did the Plymouth and Exeter test this year, which was numerical, no, it was deductive reasoning and verbal, and that was actually fine. And I got my test back from Exeter. So these last 2 years, I've been thinking that I had no general level of intelligence. It turned out I did, and I was okay. But I think it's really easy to fear them. I know a lot of people that just think, I just don't want to go anywhere near that. But actually, sometimes it can be not quite as scary as you think as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, yeah, it's something to bear in mind. But I think the point that you mentioned, that actually one of the rationales for doing it is that they take, then it takes the emphasis off, things like masters and those courses use that instead of that. So yeah, it's definitely worth thinking about. The other thing that made me think when you said that, Farhana, is that so courses definitely differ in terms of whether they have assessment tests before you get onto the course, but they also differ in terms of having exams on the course. And again, I think people don't realise that. So some courses don't have any exams at all. So in Oxford, we didn't have any exams whatsoever, whereas there are some courses that have quite a few exams. So again, that's something, you're certainly not going to be the only factor, but it is worth just being aware of how the courses vary. And that information isn't so easy to access, I think, actually. And I mean, it is a fact as well that, and I always do just draw people's attention. Again, I wouldn't put too much emphasis on this, but the number of applicants per place for courses does vary quite significantly. And again, that information is not easy to get, but it varies from about, I think the lowest is about 15 applicants per place to about 45 to 50. So it's quite significant variation. So again, it's worth just, I think all of these are things just to be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, so it's with hindsight, so speaking from experience, I didn't realise I would have to do exams on the course. That's my lack of research probably, but I've ended up doing 4 exams during my first 2 years. So, and that's it now. But if I really keep in mind, that was something that probably would have changed my decision a little bit. But I've managed, that's great. But yeah, it's thinking about those things. I also remember when I was applying initially, I was slightly avoidant of group interviews, imagining what they might be like. And actually, one of the group interviews, the one I did at UCL was absolutely fine. It wasn't anything kind of how I imagined it to be. So those perceptions we have, test them out.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Good. Okay, should we take a break there?